Tonight, please pray with your indulgence that we rise as we pray. Almighty and ever-living God, sweet and right that as we have gathered here, we acknowledge you and give you all the glory and the praise for your goodness and your mercies towards us as individuals, for your goodness and your mercies towards us as a nation, for your goodness and your mercies towards us as your name. At this time, I want to thank you, God, for all that you have done for us, especially for Asante-Man. I want to thank you for all the leaders you have given to this great nation over the past years that the nation of Asante-Man came into existence. Bless your name for our current leader of Asante-Man, Otumfuo Osei II. We give you all the glory, O God, for the history. Says our Lord. Amen. Amen. Please listen.
Nananum, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a warm cordial welcome to Asante. MCs, and DCs, Nananum, and esteemed chiefs and queens from Asante and beyond, our religious leaders, the moderators and panelists for this morning's symposium, the Vice Chancellor
for Osei Asante, Honorable Ministers of State, Honorable Immediate Past Chief Justice, Regional Minister, Ananum, Vice Chancellor of the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, my alma mater, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my duty is to welcome you, and since in our traditional setting, saying welcome means Akwaba, I thought that my duty would be done if I just uttered the word Akwaba, and I will then resume my seat. But when Otumfuo is around, you cannot be very brief. You have to go to town and say a few more things. So I'll say a few more things, and if there are a few, just pardon me that there are a few. I speak on behalf of the Otumfuo Osei II Jubilee Planning Committee. This committee has been put together to celebrate the 20 meritorious, momentous years of Otumfuo's accession to the Golden Stool. By a very happy coincidence, this year, the Silver Jubilee year, also coincides with two seminal events in the annals of Ashanti history. These are the 150 years of the Sagrenti War, the Sagrenti War, as we call it in P, the corruption of the word Sagrenti, and also the 100 years of the repatriation of King Nana Prempeh I from Seychelles after 28 years of exile. Now, this function is the first of a series of activities to mark the celebrations, to commemorate the activities as I've enumerated. Taking them in chronological order, the 6th of February was exactly 150 years ago when British forces under Sagrenti invaded Kumasi, looted the palace of precious regalia, and completely burnt Kumasi down, and left the town smoldering after their invasion. This morning, we have assembled an array of eminent people who are knowledgeable in the Ashanti history and customs to regale us with the causes of the war, the cause of the war, and Asante after the war. It is a subject to add that since Otumfuo's installment some 25 years ago, the issue of the return of the regalia that was looted by the British has engaged his highest attention, and he has never relented in pursuing this mission and has been knocking the doors of the British establishment with a view to getting them to return their regalia. By a happy coincidence, the British finally have answered our prayers, albeit in some veiled way. But half a loaf, they say, is better than none. However, some of the regalia which were taken to the U.S. are here and going to be here until time and circumstances shall be no more. So, as I said, the jewel in the crown of the celebration will be, first and foremost, the return of the regalia from the U.S. or from America, which will be handed over to Otumfuo the day after tomorrow, on Thursday, at the Kutunkudin Deba. And then the return of the regalia at the British Museum and at the British Victoria and Albert Museum on the Akwasider Deba, which is slated for the 12th of May. We hope that even if it's a loan, it will be a permanent loan to us. As I said earlier, we have two functions this morning. One is a symposium, and the other is the launching of a book on the history of Asante. As you all know, before the written word was introduced into our educational system or into our culture, the mode of transmitting our history, our values, our culture, and our morals and other things was through the spoken word. In the evening, the old men would assemble the young ones and then tell them about the wars of old, our customs, our traditions, their games, and other things. So it was compulsory for children to attend to these calls. Hence, we call the word Tite Asum. It has been corrupted to Tite Asum, but it means Tite Asum. That is, the past resides in the years. However, with the introduction of the written word and calligraphy. The year became less receptive to Tete, and therefore new modes had to be introduced to maintain and retain our history and to transmit it from one generation to the other. We were fortunate to have Otum Force at Maprempe, the second Asante-Hene, the first formally educated Asante-Hene to ascend the stool in 1931, and through the date of his hard work, was able to restore the Confederacy, which had been disbanded in 1896 in 1935. Immediately upon ascending the stool, he felt that our modes needed to change. So, perhaps our children were going to school, and for that matter, they were not getting the tuition that they deserved and they had to have. He assembled other eminent people, the Safwajes, the Ike, C. Yourselves, the Ike Adjumans, and others, to give our history the benefit of being put down in writing, so as to remove the inconsistencies and the contradictions that attend to transmitting history orally. This was indeed a formidable task which lasted several years. And it is a happy coincidence that he had Professor Thomas Kaski, an eminent son of Asante, who though has he's been with Ashanti for over 50 years, since he came to Ashanti in 1968. Virtually a year passes without his coming down to us and writing about Asante and all our histories and everything. And Professor Bakaski has accepted to edit this book. And this is a veritable history of Asante from our own perspectives, without any biases, without any contradictions, and without any enlargements or any diminutions. And the second aspect of the program would be to auction the book. And I'm sure that you have come down with your deep pockets and with your fact check books so as to give the auction the necessary support that it deserves. I'm sure that those of you who would buy at the highest price will have autographed copies by Otumfuo himself. So, as I said earlier, I welcome you. I think I've said a few things, and if my few is not enough, I think I'll take leave and then give the floor to our eminent MC to continue the program. Thank you all very much for coming.
A round of applause.
Majesty, the Otumfuo Asante-Hene, the Honorable Regional Minister, the Honorable Members, Honorable Ministers of State, the Vice Chancellor, Nananom, Mahini, Abrimpong, the linguist, and the Pro-Vice Chancellor, the members of the academia, herein present, eminent members who are all here as a university community. I am indeed honored to be the chairman of this all-important occasion. This is an occasion which marks the 150th anniversary of the Sagrenti War. Some of us just decided to learn history in person. Unfortunately, we didn't know the inner details of the war, what caused it, and the cause of the war, and as the chairman of the occasion said, the end result for this, our great kingdom. Yes, we are here today to take stock of what happened about 150 years ago. If you look at the brochure, we have assembled eminent speakers who have amassed enough knowledge to share with us. History, they say, must be accurate, free from all distortions. It may be told that in narrating history, there are bitter ones which should not be ignored. There are sweeter ones which we should all swallow. At times we have to swallow a bitter pill just to cure ourselves. Yes. So my Lord, Nanano, distinguished elders of the Asante Mine, I am here to humbly accept the invitation to be the chairman of this great occasion, and I'm grateful to Otumfuo Asante and the chairman of the planning committee for giving me this honor at this great and memorable occasion. So I am here to serve you, and I think you all cooperate and have a fruitful discussion as the history starts to unfold for our consumption. I am grateful, and I take this opportunity to thank you once again. Thank you very much.
When it's united under its king, the British seduced away. Nana Atumfuo, Nana Num, distinguished guests, and the public, I am very honored indeed to make this short presentation about the Sagrenti War. I want to start very quickly with a review of the reign of Kwekadu Agyeman, who died in 1867. The reason I am doing this is simple. Kwekadu Agyeman was the most pernickety and stickler sort of man when it came to the law. He is known as Kwekadu Anansi, Kwekadu the Wise. He is known as Agyeman Bambuo. He was somebody who really enforced the laws of Asante. In the process, he gathered together a great deal of money in gold dust, principally, but also in specie and other things. And I say all this because I want to underline and emphasize something that I think has been overlooked. When Nana Kwekadu Agyeman died in 1867, he left behind a very great deal of money. And I will give you some idea of this. The money was stored in three places. It was stored in the Adaka Kase, the great chest of the treasury. It was stored in the Asante-British country palace at Abaraso, and it was stored elsewhere at Breman. The sums involved I've been able to calculate because we know the dimensions of the Adaka Kase, and with assistance from members of the British Mint, chemists, engineers, the kind of people who can know about the science of gold and the measurement of gold and all the rest of it. We have calculated that the amount of gold contained in the Adakasi alone at Kwekadu's death was in excess of 400,000 ounces. Now, the 100,000 ounces in 1867 were worth £1.2 million sterling. But you know what's happened to gold in our lifetime. The contemporary, the current value of the Adaka Kase is somewhere over £2 billion. A lot of money. Now, he left this money to his successor, Kofi Kakari. And Kofi Kakari was a waster. He distributed money to buy popularity, and he was eventually destoled at the end of the Sagrenti War. I'll come to the war in a moment, but let me simply say that, to underline what I've already said, that the attempt to get back the treasures looted from Kumasi by Sir Gordon Wolseley in 1874 takes no account, because it cannot, of the gold in gold dust and unworked gold that the British must have carried away with them. We don't know about this. Of course we don't know, because it was loot, private loot, and so it is separate from the cultural artifacts that Nana Atumfuo is trying to retrieve for the Asante man and retrieve for the Republic of Ghana. Now, the war itself It's often referred to generally as a colonial war, one of Britain's first colonial wars. But we can refine that a little. We can refine it, in fact, quite a lot. In the 1860s and 1870s, Britain came to realize that it did not have a first-class army. In fact, it was an army composed of people rather like in the 18th century who had bought their commissions. And this had to change, and change it did, and the leader of this change was Sir Garnet Wolseley. Assisted by the War Secretary, Edward Cardwell, he modernized the army. And of course, this didn't mean just modernizing how it was run. It was modernized from the benefits of the Industrial Revolution. And I will name only a couple of things here. The British came to Asante in 1874 to make war, 1873 to make war, with telegraph communications, with people on board the ships who brought the officers to advise them on what Asante was like. In other words, intelligence gathering on a new and unusual scale. They also had with them, and perhaps most crucially, Snider rifles. These were the result of revolutionary developments in armaments. And unlike the flintlocks used by the Asante or the muskets used by the Asante, these were very accurate, long-range repeating rifles, the first, or at least one of the first, among modern rifles. So they came, and they came with all this in their baggage and their intentions. Now, Wolseley himself was determined to rise to be head of the British Army, which he eventually did. And he brought with him to Asante a group of officers known as the Wolseley Ring, the Ring of Friends, who would rise with him. So there was a very personal motive in Wolseley fighting this war and being seen to have fought it and won it for himself, for Britain, for Queen Victoria and the rest. And we have proof of this. This was the first war in which the general in command, Wolseley, was accompanied by large numbers of the British press. This war was reported very extensively in England, with jubilation, of course, when Kumasi was taken. Now, the Asante themselves, Kwekadu Agyeman, for the 30 years of his reign, had maintained a hands-off policy towards any of the states south of the Pra and the Europeans. There were no real or significant Asante military ventures south of the Pra in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. Kwekadu Agyeman's view of things was that Asante ruled inland itself and its northern dependencies, and the British ruled the whites on the coast. So it was a world vision that really contrasted the two worlds of Africa and Europe. He was the ruler of Africa, and they were the rulers of the South, led by the whites. But of course, this was nothing to do with what Wolseley wanted or what the British government backed him to want. And so, that in 1873, the Asante withdrew those military forces he had on the borders of the Pra and southwards into almost Fanti. He withdrew them and tried to make peace with the British. Wolseley absolutely refused. There is no other word for it. He turned him down flat because Wolseley and the British government were determined to have their war. Now you can imagine the kind of propaganda that was put about by the British about Asante. A savage despotism, blood running in the streets, endless sacrifices, barbarians, racism in short, and very highly developed Victorian racism. So Wolseley crossed the Bra and went to Kumasi. Now, one of the things that's almost never noticed about the occupation is that he was only there for a couple of days. He was frightened that the Asante would counterattack. He was frightened that the army he led would come down with tropical diseases. And so, having secured his victory, he scurried back to the coast very, very quickly, stopping only at Flomina, where he sent to enforce a treaty he had drawn up with the Asante-Hini Kofi Kakari. The treaty was a treaty of, and you may are allowed to laugh at this point, the treaty was a treaty of permanent peace between Britain and Asante. And he asked that Kofi Kakari, as a sign of goodwill, hand over 50,000 ounces of gold to show his good faith. He never did that, but that's another story. Now, in the occupation of Kumasi, the place was, as previous speakers have said to you, the city was burned and comprehensively looted. The Aban, the big story building constructed by Asante-Hini Osibonso Tutu Kwame in 1819 to 22, the King's Own Palace, they were all ransacked by the British. Now, I've told you the amount of gold that was floating about Asante at this time in dust. We have no account of this. Soldiers just filled their pockets or took it away in little wrappings and things like that. So we just do not know about that, but we do know about the cultural treasures. And I just want to mention two of them in passing, and they're simply this. In the Wellcome collection, the foundation in London, there is the largest gold mask known from sub-Saharan Africa. It is a portrait of the Bandahini Woroza, defeated and killed by the Asante-Hini Osikwadwo in the 1760s, and it weighs over 2 kilos. Its current value in gold alone, never mind its aesthetic value, its cultural value, its value in gold alone is over £80,000 sterling. The other piece of loot that I want to particularly emphasize was not taken in 1874. It was taken in 1896 when the British returned and arrested Asante-Hini Adjutant Prempeh. Now, you would think this was nothing. Somebody must have just picked it up and taken it away. It was a brass basin called Ayakasi, which was displayed before the Royal Mausoleum at Bantama and was part of the practices of recalling the ancestors and tried to get this battered brass basin restored. And the British wouldn't give him it. And it is still in Britain at the United Services, the Army Museum in London. The war itself had a catastrophic effect on Asante. Catastrophic in the sense that, well, in a number of senses. Above all, it shattered unity. Asante works best when it's united under its king. The British seduced away and led away large numbers of defectors into the Gold Coast colony, and Asante descended into a period of anarchy. Now, you all know that this anarchy was capped. Its lowest point was the civil war that occurred at Asante between 1883 and 1888. There is no doubt at all that the British encouraged resistance to Kumasi, whether by giving arms, which was illegal, of course, and which they never talked about publicly, money, or just general support, and above all, refuge to those who opposed the Asante-Hini in the Gold Coast colony, which they had established in 1874 after the Sagrenti War. I haven't got much time left, so I will simply cover what is left of this story. In 1892, the British wrote to Asante-British Prempeh I, offering him British protection. That is, that Asante, which he was trying to restore to its former status after the Civil War, that Asante should come under formal British protection. Asante Prempeh simply refused. He said, no, we're an independent kingdom. Not only did he refuse, he sent an embassy to London to underline his point that Asante was an independent kingdom. The embassy spent some time in London, but the British government refused to see it. And while it refused to see it, it was planning a second invasion of Asante. And this occurred as the embassy returned to the coast and the British advanced on Kumasi again in 1896. There, Asante Prempeh was faced by one of the greatest challenges that any Asante has faced. Should he fight? Should he not? The solution he came up with is beyond admirable. He knew that after the Sagrenti War and after the civil wars, he knew perfectly well that if the British unleashed their military power now on what was a weakened Asante, people would suffer in enormous numbers. So instead of permitting this to happen, he decided to surrender himself and his mother and various other of his dignitaries in his family to the British, provided they prosecuted no military action in Asante. So he was taken away as a British captive, and the rest of the story you know. He remained on the coast until 1900, and then he was sent to Sierra Leone, and finally to the Seychelles in the Indian Ocean, from which he did not return until 1924. But the Asante themselves had had enough of this. In 1896, when they took Prempeh away, they established a system of direct military, informal rule through collaborationist chiefs, people that they had appointed themselves to run the country for them. This only lasted for 4 years because the Asante themselves, ordinary people led by chiefs as well, fostered, created, and fought a military uprising against the British in 1900. This is commonly known as the Yasantiwako because of the heroic behavior of the Ujwesiiba, the woman Yasantiwa. That war ended in the ruthless suppression of the Asante. This time, there was no offer of perpetual peace. There was no offer of friendship. There was simply the fact that Asante was made a British crown colony in 1901, was given a British governor to rule over it in the absence of an Asante-Hini, and in the aftermath of the war, large numbers of people convicted of treason against the British crown by fighting for Asante in that war were jailed, hanged, or otherwise deported. Now, there's very little else I need to say, except that this is a shameful episode in British history, like most of British colonialism. It is a shameful episode because it was based on industrial might and a racial ideology. The British were never a great continental military power. They did not have large land armies. What they did have and what they pursued was an overseas empire from which they could extract money through trade, preferential rates, and all the rest of it. And Asante was one of the earliest additions across the world to that particular empire. It's often forgotten, and this is my final remark here, it's often forgotten how short British colonialism was. When I came to Asante, age 22, with Adubuahen in 1968, I met people who had lived all the way through the British period. They were born before the British came, and they were there when the British left in 1957. So it is time finally to put this episode in the past and to reassert Asante unity under the Asante-Hene and go forward into the future. And I encourage most strongly Asante man to pursue further the matter of the restoration of the treasures that were taken in 1874 and taken in 1896. Thank you very much.
We're delighted to have eminent men and women who are herein gathered to lend us their thoughts on the way forward. Birmingham University, UK, Professor Tom McCaskey.
To provide a big picture. So we are looking at how the Asante and the Amantuo fared in this last quarter.
And all hearing present, may I stand on existing protocol to proceed. I shall try to sketch my thoughts around the 18th and the 19th century Asante politics. My interests fundamentally would be to focus on Kumasi. One of our sisters, Edwards, who is a PhD candidate from the diaspora, has done something very significant, and I shall use her point on the setting of Kumasi and the palace prior to 1874. The 19th century cosmopolitan city of the Asante-Hene in Kumasi was a well-built metropolis and economic center covering 1 mile north to the south and 3/4 of a mile in width. The monumental Ahimfie, which is the palace of the Asante-Hene, was located on a hill in the city center, measuring 1,500,000 square feet and covering 34 acres. The east edge of the imperial residence was the sacred Subin River, the supreme river deities and Asante-Hene's place where he will worship Tradiampo. Even to the immediate west, strategically positioned throughout the lush garden landscape of the Asante-Hene city were elaborately Asante-designed buildings and residences belonging to royal chiefs and courtiers to the king. The Asante-Hene city in the Edum area was not demarcated by walls like the typical imperial cities. The architecture of the noblemen's houses surrounding the residence, the dense forest, and the Subin River formed an invisible defense against invaders. European surveyors and religious and diplomatic visitors were in awe of the vast forest landscape and the symbolic, aesthetic, and technical beauty of the structures as they entered the city. However, the position of the Asante city and surrounding natural and architectural elements was more than what was visible. The imperial metropolis of the Asante was layered with spiritual, cultural, and security values to the nation. Indeed, Kumasi represented the traditional political capital of the forest state of Asante, as well as the residents of the Asante. The Oyoko Royals, all important Kumasi office holders and functionaries, stayed there and performed services associated with the Kumasi court, and their conjugal families resided in Kumasi. Again, it is significant to note that Kumasi was also the cultural capital. In this capacity, the atmosphere of Kumasi was characterized by elegance or sophistication, as initially noted. In fact, in 1874, the British, led by Sir Garnet Wolseley, defeated Asante and ransacked Kumasi. The election of Prempeh I as Asante, which began 10 years after the Sagrenti War, was marked by civil war and eventual deportation and exile with key Asante leaders in 1896, first to Sierra Leone and finally to the island of May in Seychelles. British attempts to break Asante and impose their hegemony on Asante did not end with Prempeh's exile. From 1900 to 1901, in the last Asante War of Independence against the British, Asante was defeated and placed under the control of the governor of the Gold Coast. The British then instituted measures and institutions that started the colonization of Kumasi, which they retained as the capital of Asante. May I, as a point of emphasis, say that when you look at the broader community of society of Kumasi, even though we had the Asante with his might and his abilities, the society was equally egalitarian, so that you had members of the community from office holders to those who held no office or position. To that extent, we understand that Asante also had different people crisscrossing. In fact, Kumasi historically was opened up to Hausa, Mande traders, and different people from different regions and territories prior to the 18th century and to the 19th century. Kumasi remained an entrepot, so to speak, where different ideas radiated. As a matter of fact, the formation and the founding of Kumasi out of Kwaman, where the Asante Constitution was fully firmed up, gives us a very clear impression about the fact that the Asante and Kwame Frimpong Anoche, Okonfo Anoche, and the eminent chiefs who resided in their specific social and political jurisdiction agreed to that constitution which brought about an Asante Union, an idea that was alien to the European, because the European assumed that the Asante Union came about only through war, and assumed that the Asante Union could be compared to that, for example, of the European kings or monarchs who might have had their territories or spheres through dint of war. As a matter of fact, this constitution, I dare say, and challenge the discussion, ran parallel to the Magna Carta. In that respect, its authority was so binding in the sacred stool, the Sikija. That spirituality is that which was also missing in the minds of the European in many respects. Asante from Kumasi was interested in diplomacy. And so before even war, there will be diplomatic engagements, there will be discussions, there will be emissaries. And this subsisted since the time of Osei the first, Asante-Hene. So the critical question, therefore, is to ask, why didn't the British annex Asante after 1874? Just to jump into other discussions. What had changed on the side of the British by 1800? I know that the chair is looking at me. I have more time. The 19th century began with, the reign of, Osei Kwame Isibev. And we understand that there were a lot of interesting dynamics in terms of diplomacy. In fact, his peaceful relations between the British is well documented. In fact, Kumasi in this period received 3 European missions, which included individuals like William Hyde Copper in 1816. Then we have Frederick James, Thomas Edward Bowditch, William Hutchinson, and Henry Tedley in 1817, and Joseph Dupuy, Francis Collins, Benjamin Salmon, and David Mills Graves in 1820. So Kumasi was the heart of diplomacy in the territory referred to as Asante and the broader enclaves that it covered. So that is just one example which suffices, right? That these diplomatic missions had one goal: to negotiate for peace, to ensure that there was sometimes an uneasy truce between themselves and their neighbors, including the British. So 19th century diplomacy in Kumasi took a rather different form, nature, and approach over a period of time. It was associated with a changing political scene, especially with the growing influence of Europeans at the coast. So diplomacy, which is effectively known in the modern sense, which requires that you have a representation in a territory negotiating for peace among other social, economic, and political dynamics, subsisted within Asante. In fact, from about the 1760s onwards, Kumasi had brought, conquest, and received rent from Christiansborg Castle from the Dutch. But beyond this period, we see that the space between the 1800s, there was negotiations, and also there were ideas of war and diplomacy which subsisted. And some of these, reports have been, perfectly written and documented by the good professor of erudition, McCaskey. Now, the peaceful relations between Asante and the British in the first 2 decades of the century took a different turn. What happened? Why did it take a different turn? Why would Kumasi go to war? We know about Asante interest in Dutch holding at Elmina. We also understand that the interest of the British was to ensure that Asante's control or influence, or better still, hegemony, at the coastal regions will be dealt with once and for all. The team with Wesley arrived in the territory referred to as the colony by January, the end of January, came as far as to Asante by 31st of January. By the 6th of January, mission accomplished. They returned through Fomena, where I come from, signed. The treaty was not signed. It was a treaty he would even leave because he would not sign. The story that I found therein has already been shared by Professor McCaskey. Now, you understand that it was an expeditious mission. They returned hurriedly, and it did not suggest to us that they were there to stay. Secondly, the terms of the agreement itself, or the truce itself, or the treaty itself, also suggest a very interesting thing, because it did not tell us that the British wanted to have an emissary or a resident commissioner in Kumasi, and for that matter, Asante. Now, this notwithstanding, you see a disputation, especially when Edubuain writes in a later period and argues that the British were interested in subverting Asante. That is why he argues that they will support Adansi breakaway, they will support the Gabin quandary, and all the other quandaries that were emerging within the state. In fact, if you shift towards Kimball's argument, there is a suggestion that the British had a certain vacillatory approach. They will not get into Kumasi and make any intervention, but they will not also come to fight Asante, even if Asante was plundering itself. In many respects, it is this civil war which persisted in Asante, plus the challenging leadership of Kakari, among other things, that will lead to the depletion of Asante's resources. Two, you would also find that with the depletion of the resources of Asante, the Asante constitution, which they held together, the social contract, which by Asante constitution allowed the state to use a subtle coercion to get members of the state to go to war, had waned. Leadership challenge with Kakari, the one who followed after him, and also an internecine war, a civil war, which had eaten into the treasury of Asante. In many respects, some have argued that is what will cause Prempeh the First to capitulate. In many respects, I agree in tutu with my professor with great erudition that through the tact of diplomacy, Prempeh the First would have to save his people from war, because post-1874 and another war just at 1896 would have been too damning and too dangerous for the health and the power of Asante, especially holding it from Kumasi. I will try to just wrap up. I have 1 minute. So, what is my last take on this within 1 minute? You would appreciate that by 1900, the British had come to town again. They were successful at that because the rallying call for people to come to fight did not have that kind of zest. And that is written by McCaskey. Asante will regroup, but we see that even when Asante had been defeated, by 1905, Resident Commissioner Fuller had taken over to behave as if he was an Asante Hene. And even when the real Asante Hene had returned, he made him Kumasi Hene, a creation by the British. The intrigues by the outsiders is what Asante has sought to cure and has found a balancing act to sustain the union till now. I rest my case. Thank you.
Also as the Dodo War or the British and the Asante signed the Asante-British Treaty of 1831 at Cape Coast Castle. This treaty empowered the British to create the British protected territories on the lands across the river. By 1872, the Danes and the Dutch had sold all their trading forts and castles to the British and left out. These lands became protected from any Asante control or encroachment. The British protected the territories of the southern states, including Asen, Wasa, Fante, Dentra, Akawu, Ga, Adamwe, and many others supported the British, served as their informants. As so European power on the coast, the British fomented another war against the Asantes. And this is how it all began.
Owura Chami. Dedi kai. E ma therefore kakari. Ani na ma kwa ba. Ye to su bio. Se mani to therefore kakari. E na ma se. E na mo to. Akuba pa. Eni je. Ah, ye o ma sentiment no. E san se. Eni ma hemfo. Ye strike the didn't pa e bi say. Ye be su ska de ko fi abi biara. O to sa frɛ. Ye ni me ni amuso. Ya ba. But I tell you, what I carry, and I am a friend of my interior.
The same seven. Sapa, Sagrenti, Najasi, I mean, I'm possible. Oh, oh, Papa, and I can tell you. Oh, Papa, go water. We couldn't to Yopa. Yopa saw some Amoruko. Maybe I didn't any of good at it. Make a gentleman and a friend from Ampo. And as soon as you're jealous, I can hear. We told you to know. We told you to know. We told you to know.
Nana no, see you right back. I mean, what? Me say, they can't come.
No. Be like Jerry or Who? You walk up here. When am I sorry? And by this say, someone will young one come up. One thing, I was a brody, why am I not telling him to? And she never be said, Nana was it a gap. Or do one come out at the attack, you're ready, and yes, Santa Mine, and then an Ania Bra, a person. And typically the idea said, you're one to one. You're right. Washington.
the Kumasi Cultural Center.
It's indeed an honor to have been asked to launch this book. Your Royal Majesty, the last time I had a one-on-one meeting with you, I went home and told my mom that I met the king of Ashanti. Then she started jubilating. Yay, me ba, for. So if my mom was alive today, I think if she was to see me on TV, she would say, hey, and then the for book now she would have said, today my son is launching a book written by Otumfuo Osagyimai Prempeh II. The book is a concise autobiography of the author, Otumfuo Osagyimai Prempeh II, the 14th Asante-Hene, overseeing an illustrious research committee of 9, which included the likes of Berima Kojo Owusu-Ansah, C.E. Osei, J.W.K. Appiah, I.K. Agyeman, Oheneba Boakye Dankwa, Akyempem-Hene, Edward Owen, George Asafo Ejei, and Chairman Bafo Akoto. The work started in 1939, unless Ata Yakyerematen, another local intellectual, was later added to the research team to prepare the script between 1944 and 1946. It will take a little more than half a century, and the hard work and dedication of notable historians like Professor Adubuahin, Professor Emmanuel Champon, and Professor Makiski, coupled with the ardent support of Otumfuo Opoku II and Otumfuo Setutu II, to discover and compile the original writings and typescripts for finally producing the history of Ashanti. To enrich this volume, it is a must-read for all and sundry, and should find its way into every house, library, educational institutions, and bookstores. Otumfuo Osagyimai Prempeh II considered this publication his greatest wish, and is now displayed before us. To get hold, all of us should endeavor to get hold of a copy of this book. See, as I was reading and going through pages, by a sheer act of serendipity, I opened page 181. And here it was, story. And the story reads, talks about Edua Wabin. He was a member of the Asenia family, and he went to report to Akuse Yanom, Amekomhene, that he was of the same family as he was, and that he had removed himself from his original town to settle at Odahum. Akuse Yanom accepted him warmly as a relative and lived happily with him. Edu Yabua Krentwi used to visit Odahum and then return happily to Amekom. He was a medical man and possessed many efficacious medicines. He was referred to as Edua Wabin, who lived at Odahum. This was the reason that there's now a town called Eduaben. My grandparents are from Eduaben, and from there, they moved to Jati. So today, as I was reading the book, I came to know more about why the town is called Eduaben. The pages of this book may also read something about your family, about your inheritance, about hope, about aspirations, about loyalty and commitment to a cause bigger than yourself, about patriotism, individuals who are willing to even pay the ultimate price so that their kingdom will survive. This is a book which is a must read. It teaches us many lessons as to how you even die for your kingdom, as to how you dedicate yourself to making your kingdom better than you came to find it. There are men and women who have done so many things. I saw stories of commitment, stories of promises made and promises kept, to the extent that a woman who asked that when she passes on, her name should be remembered after she had given up her son. The Otumfuo then made a commitment to her, and consequently, Otumfuo and the subsequent Otumfuos named their children after this woman. Promises made, promises kept. Here is the story of a kingdom that has stood the test of time, a kingdom that has contributed so much. So much to humanity, a kingdom that we have to learn from in order to create a better world, a better nation. Otumfuo Sagrenti II, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to do this launching. And it is my prayer that all of us will pick copies of this book. It's also my prayer that other authors of children's books will begin to take this book and write children's versions of it, so that our children will begin to know more about this great kingdom. Otumfuo, your Royal Majesty, the King, with your permission, I declare the book, History of Ashanti, by Otumfuo Nana Osei Agyeman Prempeh II, duly launched.
For your loyal subjects, 1990 are giving 100,000 Ghana cedis. A round of applause for them.
Transfer na be ye budget cash ye budget check and so and also ye budget ye try no na see
Please. And you know that he Jose Kwame Despite also joins with 100,000 Ghana cedis. A round of applause. We want to come down to the Thomas Boisi Sapong, Executive Head at Kalban, 20,000 Ghana cedis. We say thank you.
So you can say architectural and engineering services.
Thousand Ghana cedis. A round of applause.
Asante-British, maybe 10,000 or what the 10,000 account. I'm an 20,000. How much mama wants some manana? Mama wants some manana. Or the kind of 10,000 by what the 10,000 account. I'm an 20,000. And that must.
Thank you, panelists and moderators.
Thank you.